position the feedback screen here or whatever it is in a different place so I can see stuff. That should probably work. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Kelly Asher. This session is Landlord Outreach. I'm the Landlord Tenant Liaison at HHCK. So we'll be going over some slides, I guess is what I should say now. Yeah. Also, this is my first time doing a session on a webinar, so forgive me, I'm extra nervous today as a result because it's new, kind of new frontier for me. So we'll go to, I guess, yeah, so I say slide and then we go to the next. Is that how this works? Okay, yeah, so I'll do kind of a brief introduction of what I do as the Landlord Tenant Liaison. We'll cover some terms that you all have probably already covered, but it can't hurt to go over those. That'll probably be the part where it feels like I'm reading from the slides because I will be. And then we'll talk about identifying benefits of your program. And then we'll go into general strategy. One of the things with this is that you do want to sell your program, and I'll go in more detail about that. We'll touch on cold calling, landlord associations and landlord forums and word of mouth networking. And then we'll go over some details regarding specific units, and then we'll have a question slot at the end. But of course, I am the type of person that welcomes questions throughout the session. I think as organic as we can be would be helpful for me. So slide. As I said, I am currently the Landlord Tenant Liaison for HHCK. I have been with HHCK off and on for several years. From 2016 to mid-2017, I served as the Vista Leader for the Homes for All program. And then I served in Homes for All State and National from 2011 to 2013 as a construction member. I acted as a weatherization assistant, energy efficiency crew leader, and also a site supervisor for both Habitat for Humanity in Madison and Clark counties and Home Energy Partners. So that's kind of my background when it comes to housing. So yeah, slide. Normally I would go around the room and like ask for introductions for everybody, but it's weird. So I don't know if that makes sense to do. And it would be really awkward to do online. So we'll cover some terms here. That whenever I talk about HUD, is the Department of Housing and Urban Development. You'll see in the slides, I'll use shorthand for LL and that will be representative of landlord. I'll also use the term property manager, owners. All of those will be used interchangeably throughout this presentation. There is more nuance when you get into the weeds of the programs, but these are the folks that we're selling the program to. So that's the reason we're just kind of lumping it all together. Fair market rent is an important term to understand. Fair market rents are, let's see, maybe I should do this. Sorry, I can't see my own slide. Oh, neat. Goes across the bottom. Fair market rents are federal maximums that deem the fair amount to charge for a unit based on its size and location. So like they normally go by counties. Sometimes they go by a metropolitan area, such as Fayette County, and then there will be surrounding counties that will also have the same fair market rent as Fayette, and the same with Jefferson County. Those are our two metropolitan areas when it comes to that. They generally do a survey. You can see the methodology on HUD's website. I'm not going to go into that. I'll be talking about utility allowances, the calculation and the charts. So utility allowance is the amount allowable for utilities based on the unit size and the type of amenities that it has. So this amount is added to the contract rent if any utility is to be in the tenant's name. So fair market rent, it will take into consideration the cost of rent and assuming utilities are included. If they're not included, then you end up doing a utility allowance calculation to see if it falls within FMR. So we'll go, the UACs in Kentucky are generated either by KHC or a local housing authority. You'll be able to find that on KHC's help desk. I won't go into the details of how to navigate to that, but you'll go to kentuckyhousing.org, look at their help desk, and you'll be able to type in utility allowance charts, and then they'll have different allowance charts per region. There are counties that Kentucky doesn't cover. They go through each of those in each of the region charts, and then you'll be charged with following up with your local housing authority if you don't have that utility allowance chart. Yeah, so slide. Yeah. So as I said, contract rent, I mentioned that term. It's the base rent charged by a landlord. So for a one bedroom, say I'm a property manager and I'm charging $400 a month. No utilities are included. That's when we're going to do a utility allowance and figure out what the gross rent is. So that's the total amount with the utilities added in. The utility allowance is based on an average. It's not assuming that the unit is energy efficient or that it's, it's drafty. So those are things to kind of keep in mind about a utility allowance. It's just kind of a guideline, but it is a number to keep in mind. So you do those, the contract rent and utility allowance to figure out the gross rent. You'll hear me talk about housing quality standards. I believe these PowerPoints will be sent to you. So I included a link to an inspection form. This type of inspection form is meant to be self-guided. There are two types, one where you know how to do the inspection, and then this form that I linked here. And it'll go over how to do an inspection. There are federal standards and regulations required for safe, sanitary, and decent housing. That's kind of the definition, just kind of drafted straight from HUD. And if you have a problem with the link or you lose where this PowerPoint is, or you can always type into Google HUD H2S inspection form, and you'll be able to find it really quick that way. Slide. Another term that I want to go over is SD. It's the security deposit. It's an amount that usually matches 1 month of rent that's reserved for damages beyond wear and tear. I do want to make that very clear. The security deposit doesn't just magically go away. And if it's something like, okay, well, this would happen even if the tenant wasn't there, that's wear and tear is not something that gets accounted for that makes the security deposit go away. Another term that I will use that comes along with utility allowances is UAP and the utility assistance payment. This is a payment to clients to cover utility costs if they are not covered in the rent. So normally, and it's dependent on their income, at least with our programs. But when we do the utility allowance calculation and do the worksheets, we figure out what the utility assistance payment is going to be. And that's to make sure that the client isn't going to be put in a bad position as a result of utilities not being included in the rent. Slide. Okay, so this section is identifying benefits to your programs. What it's going to be is a series of questions. And so we'll be asking those questions, and these questions are really kind of generalized to get you thinking about your program. At HHCK, we have permanent supportive housing programs. I am familiar with those programs, so we kind of know what our benefits are. But I don't know your program, so I'm not going to assume that you have one that you may have the strength that we don't have, and vice versa. Slide. So this one is kind of the easy one, the first question. Does your board guarantee rent? There's a reason that I have that as the first question, because it is, especially right now, having rent guaranteed is a strength. It sucks if that's the reality, but it's a strong strength in this environment. Another question that you'll want to be asking, and these questions are questions to, and I see a typo and I'm mad about it. These questions are questions to maybe take to your supervisor if you don't know the answers to them already. I'm assuming you don't, since we are in the early days of your service. But another question is, are you able to include the security deposit? It is, if you're not able to include the security deposit, it is important to make that clear to both your client and the property manager that you're negotiating with. Sometimes you may need to negotiate a payment plan or something to that effect. One situation that when I was working with a housing choice voucher, we actually ended up doing a fundraiser to raise the money for the security deposit. So you can be creative, but that can present an obstacle if your program doesn't specifically pay the security deposit up front. I mentioned FMR. You want to know what the FMR is for your area. If your area or your service area covers multiple counties, you may want to have a chart. When you're looking up, it kind of getting into negotiations, knowing the bedroom size and what the FMR is for the county, for the unit is, it's something you want to have in front of you before you go into the conversation of talking with a landlord when you're talking about specific units. The other question is, right now with the pandemic, there are COVID-19 waivers. They're easy to apply for if your programs are through Kentucky Housing, KHC. And those waivers can allow your program to go over fair market rent when it's needed, because the market, it's either really there's a lot of units available or there are no units available, is what the kind of situation looks like. So when there are no units available under fair market rent, right now your organization can apply for a waiver. It's easy to be able to go over fair market rent when the situation calls for it. So that is another question thinking about is the benefits that you have. Can you go over fair market rent when it's needed? How long is your rent guaranteed? And what I'm going to talk about here is permanent supportive housing versus rapid rehousing. And then I'll also talk about things like TDRA and housing choice vouchers. So permanent supportive housing is the type of program that HHCK mostly has. We also do have a medium-term assistance, such as tenant-based rental assistance. So we're able to say, with permanent supportive housing, the rent's guaranteed forever. Signing your lease, we'll be able to do it again come the next year and continue paying rent until this client either leaves the program, passes away, or Congress chooses to not fund it anymore. It has been refunded since I've been in the nonprofit housing sector every time, regardless of there have been some contentious times, but it always ends up being refunded. So it is very safe. It's a safe bet right now, especially, that those monies will remain around. Now, rapid rehousing, that's a type of medium-term assistance. And both of these should be framed as hands up versus hands out. That really makes a difference when you're talking about these programs. With rapid rehousing, the intention is that this person is going to take over the rent and pay it themselves once they are stabilized. So that is the difference there. It can be anywhere from 3 to 24 months. Knowing how long your program guarantees it for the client is important with rapid rehousing. I have opinions on how long that should be, but you need to know how long you can cover their rent in that situation. And if they're not stabilized, what happens in that situation? Another question is, will they ever need to expect to collect an amount from the client or from the tenant? With our programs, we pay 100% of the rent on behalf of the tenant. So if they ever end up having to owe an occupancy charge because of their income, we found an income or something like that, they pay that amount to us. And then if something happens and for some reason they can't make that amount, we work with them to figure out the solutions around that, as opposed to putting the onus on the property manager. It's a strength for us, because I'm able to say you will never have to approach the tenant for rent. It'll always come into your account at the first of the month, and it'll always be there. So that's an example. If they do expect to need to be able to collect an amount for the rent, how much would that normally be? What does that situation look like? If it's based on income, is there a ceiling of how much it will ever be? Those types of questions we kind of lead in from that slide. Is rent paid by direct deposit? For us, we pay the rent by direct deposit, so it's always in their bank account at the beginning of the month. It happens, it's done. So there's no risk of a check being lost in the mail. There's no needing for them to come pick it up. Those types of situations, we've made a requirement that rent be paid by direct deposit with all new landlords. I can't express how much easier. I can't imagine what it would be like if we didn't pay rent by direct deposit. So it's something that's really helpful for me at least. Another question is your organization or your program able to help mitigate cost of damages, and you want to present this in the rare event they occur beyond the security deposit? Most programs are not able to do that. Our programs with our programs, we're not able to guarantee something to that extent. So that is another question to kind of ask with with your programs. It is important to note that with the folks that we work with, they're no more risk than any other tenant that may apply to different properties and different units. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Slide. So the next question, so I talked about housing quality standards. There are another set of standards called habitability standards. So it is important to ask what is necessary for a unit to pass inspection. I'll kind of hit some details of some common places, but that's a good thing to kind of have in mind. HQS versus habitability. Habitability is a little easier to pass, is kind of the general rule there. But I'm not fully familiar with habitability standards. Another question is your organization able to facilitate inspections remotely, or are they required to try to complete them remotely? That can be a strength. It could just be a detail that you want to cover. I've been doing inspections remotely since April, and it's kind of been a learning by trial by fire, but it's definitely the safest option, and you can walk through that inspection form with folks. There's even a fillable form that you can have kind of side by side. You're going through the inspection and you're asking the questions and filling it in as you go. And then are you able to facilitate the paperwork completion remotely? What does that look like for your organization? I'm not going to get into the weeds of that, but it's another question that you want to ask. What does the paperwork load look like? With our permanent supportive housing programs, the paperwork workload is quite a bit versus our tenant-based rental assistance, which is there's like 5 forms. That can lead into more forms, but it's a lot easier paperwork load. Some property managers and landlords do care about how much work goes into that. But the thing to kind of keep in mind if you do run into pushback about paperwork is, look, don't forget, rent's guaranteed. Once we get through this, we're through it. So that's something to keep in mind. Slide. One of our strengths for our permanent supportive housing programs is that we provide housing-focused case management. So our case managers, they meet with the clients. If they're high-need clients, they meet with them on a very regular basis. And that can make a big difference in tenancy management. And so if you are participating in case management, and more than likely your program is, that's a strength. That's a strength because if some property managers want to know, okay, well, how often are you going to be in the unit, and be able to let me know if there's, possibly an issue, a repair needed, or something to that effect. So that can be helpful in making new folks comfortable. And if there's a situation of a disagreement between a tenant and a property manager, what does your mediation process look like? How does that work? What does that look like for your program? So those are a couple other questions to kind of keep in mind. Slide, please. Okay, so we've talked about identifying benefits. You've gone through the process. You've asked your supervisor what benefits are there to our programs. So when you're asking these questions, you want to be thinking about, well, what does it look like from a landlord's perspective, a property manager's perspective? One of the things I will touch on throughout this section of the presentation is it's a business for them. We got into this field a lot of us on this call probably got into this field, at least for some part of the reason, to be able to help folks who need it. A lot of property managers are willing to do that, but they're mainly in it to make money. So that's important to keep in mind, and that's why you're trying to sell your program. One of the things you want to look at, and you don't, and I'll hit these points, but you want to let them know that this is not any more of a risk than renting from somebody else just coming from the private market. Slide, please. So as I said, this is a business, and you want to emphasize the benefits to your program. You'll be having, depending on the situation, you'll be having many different conversations. And so you want to build a kind of rapport. And what I mean by that is there are a couple of different techniques when it comes to building rapport, but the main one is being genuine. You want to be yourself, professional, but yourself. And that's kind of the main point there. You want to let them know that, hey, you know, this is a benefit to you. I want you to be able to make money off this. And while we are able to also help somebody. So you want to look at doing that. You'll be having several conversations, and follow-up is key to building rapport with folks. So next slide. One of the points I really want to hit is being honest. And there are more points of it's okay to say, I don't know. So if you do get asked a question and it's really specific and you don't know the answer, say, I don't know. Let me write this down and I'll follow up and get back to you on that. Do you have any other questions? You don't want to lie about the program. You don't want to say, look, this is a completely safe bet. You don't want to kind of gloss over what may be the difficulties of working with someone in a program, but you want to stay honest and be truthful and not embellish the benefits of programs. When you're talking about the mediation process and what happens with, you know, in case there are issues, it's coming from a point of, and this is always kind of strange for me, but we're coming from a point of sales when we're doing landlord outreach and talking to landlords. And so you want to emphasize, even if you are, you want to emphasize the customer service that's available to them. So if there's ever an issue, you're there. Right? And if you can't reach us, we will call you back. And what is the expected time frame within, you know, a callback? Another question, if you're having a hard time and you have someone on the phone and they're kind of on the fence, but they're really leaning toward, no, I don't really want to do this. I see the benefit in it, but I feel like it's still too much of a risk. A question that always kind of catches people off guard, but really opens them up and opens up more avenues for negotiation is, what would it take for you to be able to consider going into this program and working with us? And been a really useful question. I find that it makes a difference to be able to ask that question. If you've got somebody on the fence and they're leaning toward, no, I don't really want to work with your program. I've heard a lot of things that are negative. And so asking this question can really open up the conversation and allow you to continue negotiating. Next slide, please. The other thing to emphasize that I emphasize with folks is, and you're building your own strategy here, so you we customize your strategy, but we emphasize that we're proposing a partnership, that this is a team effort, and that in order for it to work really well, we need the property manager to communicate to us if they have a concern, even if it seems minor or if it seems like something that's not a big deal. At the time, if they have a concern, they feel like something's not being resolved, or they're worried that it may lead into something being resolved, you want to make sure that they have that they feel comfortable calling you early, because the earlier they call you with a concern, the more likely it is to be resolved. If you're coming in late to a situation and the property manager has already decided that no, we don't want to rent to them anymore, we're going to evict. And you don't know of anything that's happened beforehand, it can be very frustrating for all parties involved. So it is important for them to call you as soon as they have a concern and kind of emphasize that point, emphasize that it is a team effort. Your organization already likely has existing partnerships. Those are a very valuable resource to new landlords. And I'll get into that in some detail. But that's where to start. They know other people. It is kind of a field in and of itself. So they have colleagues, they have partners, they have people who they've worked with, or maybe even mentors that also have units. So you want to, when you're considering outreach and considering doing it on an organic basis, utilizing the already existing partnerships is something that can be very valuable to you. And I do want to make a point of leaning on your supervisor for specific knowledge and strategies. These folks have been in the housing field. They know they'll know if something isn't going to work, and be able to tell you why something isn't going to work. And so that is something I do want to encourage you to do. Slide. So I left this one blank to kind of give myself a chance in case I thought of any other general strategy points. I'm not at the moment, but we may come back to it. It's also an opportunity if you have any questions or any thoughts about general strategy when it comes to conducting landlord outreach. This would be a good point to kind of just have that moment in case you have any questions. Have any questions come up? I can't see the chat bar at the moment, so. I'm going to assume that there are not questions.
There aren't any questions right now.
Okay. Cool. We can go into the next slide. I do want to talk about what not to do when you're doing landlord outreach. The main thing is to guilt folks. If they say no and they're adamant about saying no, trying to get them into participating in the program is not something that's going to work. You can now don't mistake me for saying that you cannot make a compassionate argument for why trying out these programs is a good idea. There is some window of opportunity for that, but for the most part, it's the main concern for landlords and property managers is mitigating the risk. If you do have somebody who is excited about the compassionate side of this work, that's a great property manager to have, and that's a great partnership to have. And if you do run into that, I can't express enough how valuable it will be to jump on that. As tempting as it might be, this kind of goes along the same lines as guilt. You don't want to shame them and say, well, you don't want to participate in these programs. You're kind of you can think of words to say there, but like you don't want to do that because people remember negative interactions more than they remember positive interactions, and that can work against you in other conversations. So they can, like I said, landlords and property managers have their own networks. They talk to each other, and if they recall a negative interaction with you as a representative of a program, that can have impacts throughout the community as far as whether or not folks are going to work with you. You don't want to get on a soapbox. Again, it's kind of always the same thing. You don't want to find yourself really trying to win the argument of why. Like, you don't want to find yourself in a position where they feel like you are looking down on them, even if what they're saying is something that is an issue for you. Another thing that I find is that when you get too deep into the weeds about details of the programs as you're having these conversations, you can lose folks' interests really quick. So that is something to keep in mind. You kind of want to give a broad overview. If they do ask a specific question, then of course go into that, but kind of generally just give the broader look of what your program looks like and how it works, and go from there. Okay, slide. So cold calling, it's what a lot of you will be doing when you're, and I'm sure that Jimmy covered some of this in her, and if not a lot of it, in the housing search session. So cold calling is you're calling landlords off of Zillow, out of newspaper ads and things of that nature. Slide. And so one of the things you'll want to keep in mind with cold calling, slide, is you'll want to develop an elevator speech. Now, of course, this is kind of a general given, but you do want to introduce yourself at the beginning of the conversation, the organization you're with, and if this unit is still available. Even if it's not available, you still have an opportunity to present your pitch. I know that you probably hit elevator speeches. I know Caitlin likes them a lot. They're very valuable to kind of have what your pitch is. So, for example, I'll say, hi, I'm Kelly Asher. I'm with the Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky, and I want to know if the unit on 202 Street is still available. If it is or if it isn't, I will say, well, I've worked with a permanent supportive housing program. What that means is that rent is guaranteed. In addition to that, we also provide housing-focused case management. Do you have any questions about our programs? Would you be interested in learning more? Would that be something that you would be interested in partnering with us? And I'll kind of ask all of those questions depending on how the conversation is going right after the pitch. So for me, I'll mention this several times because it is a big benefit, especially now. You want to include the main benefit of your program in the elevator speech, and then the other benefit that maybe makes your program stand out to something versus Section 8. For us, it's case management, and I do really find that helps make people consider partnering with us. Slide, please. The other thing with the elevator speech is you want to practice the speech until you are comfortable delivering it. So it is, if you've ever done any sort of presentation or something to that extent, you do want to continue to practice it over and over and over, this 30 seconds. And then you'll want to practice it with somebody that you know. So someone that will feel comfortable giving you feedback. That may be your supervisor, that may be a fellow member that you've met here this week. But you want to get feedback to kind of try to polish that speech up. You want to know if it's too long, or if it's not exciting enough, or I really didn't know what you were talking about. You'll want to know those things so that when you do make a cold call, you'll kind of have that in your toolbox. Slide. So as I said, with kind of just my really dry version of what an elevator speech looks like, after you make the pitch, ask a question that leads further into conversation. And then, of course, I give you kind of a basic structure of a question, but are they interested in learning more? Do they want would they consider moving forward with us with those things in mind? So you want to ask the questions that still open up, and open-ended questions as well, that open up that conversation, that really kind of gives you an idea of, you'll be able to hear their tone and where they're currently standing on the idea of working with your program. Next slide. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because you did have a housing search session, but online sites like Zillow are places to find folks to call. Realty companies will often do business with a variety of property managers and landlords. And then your local newspaper classifieds, those are often online, and they're often listed online for free viewing. That's what I mean by for free. And so even if your local newspaper has a paywall, you should still be able to view the classifieds. Slide. So landlord associations they're a resource that I'm not fully familiar with, but I do interact with folks who are a part of landlord associations and have occasionally asked for like an outreach letter or something to that extent that they could present to their folks. Slide. There are member organizations that a lot of property managers are increasingly becoming a part of. Here in Central Kentucky, the Central Kentucky Landlord Association is a fairly large organization. They'll often have a guest speaker at all of their meetings. So there could be an opportunity there for you to be able to go and present your program at a broad level, even if it's just 3 minutes to several parties at once. So this is where utilizing the already existing partnerships can be very helpful. You can ask current landlords if they're part of a landlord association, or maybe it's a realty investment group or something to that extent, and then they can put you in contact with the folks that you need to talk with about maybe possibly giving a presentation, or even getting new contacts to reach out to. Slide, please. Landlord forums is something that we looked at doing before the pandemic hit. It's something that has been on the slate for HHCK. Community Action Council hosts really great landlord forums. Slide. And the way that they do it, and I'm terming this for the after, because right now it's not something that I don't think well, I guess we could do something online now that I'm talking about it in this environment. But as far as in-person stuff, this is for the after, when we make it to the other side of all of this. You'll want to hold a forum. The way that Community Action Council held their forums is that they held a forum about a specific topic. Emotional support animals are a big deal topic. Mental health issues are a topic that landlords want to learn more. And you'll want to bring in guest speakers and experts on those topics. Fair housing is an opportunity when there are fair housing sessions given. It's an opportunity to connect with landlords and things of that nature. And then there'll be an opportunity somewhere at that point to deliver your pitch to a lot of folks at once. And then be able to provide the space for contact to be made after the forum. The way that they did it is they had a simple form, and the handout packet. Lindsay Anderson did a wonderful job. It would be in the back, and she would simply say, if you're interested in learning more or working with us, please fill out this form. It's just your name, email, and phone number. So it was a really useful way to do kind of two things at once. It helps it provide an opportunity for property managers to come together and work on specific topics and learn more, and also reach out to them. Slide, please. I talked a little bit about this in general, but your programs, people will learn about them through word of mouth. So every interaction that you have when you're doing this is something that could be told to another person. And so it's like, you'll want to ask, as I was saying, utilizing your current partnerships, you'll want to ask your partners if they know of anyone that could be interested in working with your programs. Do they have somebody in mind? Is there someone that their occupancy rate isn't as high as it could be just because they're not able to get out there, and they've just recently renovated their units and they're trying to get the units filled? Even when you're on a cold call with someone who may not really feel comfortable with your program, there's an opportunity to ask, well, do you know of anybody who might be interested in working with us? If that conversation is positive, but they're just really like, they're not ready and they're not going to be ready, it is an opportunity to see if maybe they know of someone, a colleague or mentor or something to that effect, that may want to work with a program like yours, or that works with other programs like Section 8 and probably would be interested in your program. But I do want to hit some details when it comes to specific units. Slide. When you're talking about, you want to determine if the unit is eligible by asking what the contract rent is and if the utilities are included. And then, of course, you'll go through and do a utility allowance calculation and determine what gross rent is. If you do find that gross rent is above, always present what you can do, and if it's fair in the market, if it's reasonable, that what they're asking for is reasonable for this unit. You can always ask them how much it would take to kind of bring that amount down, if they're willing to accept that amount, and you can present the ceiling of how far you could go. Again, I did talk about the COVID-19 waivers where you can go above fair market rent. It's important to keep in mind that when you do that this market rate is reasonable for the unit that you're looking at, and when you do go above fair market rent. Slide, please. The other thing you want to do when you're talking about specific units is you want to make clear how long a lease term is for your program. Ours is 12 months, and then it goes to month to month. So 1 year lease that reverts to month after that. So making that clear and upfront to them is important. When you're talking through these different details, there will be opportunities where you can reinforce the benefits that this is a mutual partnership, and remind them of the benefits of your program, especially when you're negotiating down. You know, look, I know this isn't exactly what you were looking for, but you will always see this every month throughout the year. You'll always see this rent amount. If they're concerned, well, does the client have enough income to be able to cover their own costs? You can talk about, well, look, we provide utility assistance payment, and be able to reinforce those benefits and know and help make them comfortable in mitigating those risks. Slide, please. I do have some common HQS talking points if someone is unfamiliar with the process. If they're using building code as their guide for their units when they're renovating, their units are going to pass. But building code is throughout the state more stringent than HQS is. With rental units, sometimes they don't have to go full on with building code, but that is it's something to keep in mind. If they're familiar with Section 8 inspections or Kentucky Housing Corporation's housing choice voucher inspections, their units are going to pass, so they won't need to have too much of a worry there. If they're not familiar and just want to know like what some of the details are, the biggest one, some of the biggest points that causes fails for when I do inspections is the bathroom doesn't have any form of ventilation. There may be a window in the bathroom, but it's painted shut. So most units are going to have exhaust fans. It just needs to work. All windows that are accessible from the ground level outside have to be able to lock. And then windows in each room need to be able to stay open. So when you open it and let go, it stays open. And in order for a bedroom to be considered a bedroom, it has to have a door, and it can't be used to pass as a room that you in order to get to a different room, such as the kitchen or the bathroom, you can't pass through it. So if it's a bedroom, if it's a room that they're considering a bedroom, but in order to access the only bathroom in the unit, you have to cross through that bedroom, and it's a 2-bedroom or something like that extent, then that room doesn't count as a bedroom. So those are kind of the just common points. It's not hard to pass an HQS inspection. Just from my experience in construction, these things should not be hard, and should be relatively easy if they use decent units. Slide please. Yeah, so do we have any questions? I feel like I flew through that, and so kind of touched on general ideas. I do want to be available for questions. Yeah.
Hello, this is Stephen Collins. It sounds like you have a lot of this stuff already in place. And when I mean that, that's do you have a contact list already set up?
Yes, I do have, like, for our programs, like, we have a contact list of, like, if we're looking for specific units, we can go through and start there for folks that we've already worked with in the past. So yes, there is a specific contact list. If that, okay. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Yeah, I'm just mentioning it because there may be persons that might have a change of heart, and then they go, oh, okay, yeah, let's go ahead and do the program.
Yeah, and if you do come across, and it's a good point, if you do come across somebody who is on the fence but didn't quite feel like it, taking their name down and adding them to that list is keeping a contact list is important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, we will put the presentation on our website under member resources, and then the recording will go on our YouTube channel. Kelly, I have a question. So I know, like, yes, your role works like with like voucher programs, but I wondered if you could speak a little bit on just like, I mean, your perspective and your opinion on like recruiting landlords when like vouchers aren't available, just like finding landlords that are willing to, you know, rent to people that have, you know, that aren't connected to a program but need housing too. Like, do you think what you talked about is applicable or helpful?
Yes, I do. And then, and it is, you know, if you do find somebody, especially if you've got that compassionate landlord, and you have somebody who is looking for a unit, they've got everything that they need, but they really just need to find somebody that has an affordable unit and they can cover rent and they don't need any other help otherwise. That's a contact that you can provide to them. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm just like looking at who's on the call, and not everyone is with a site that has like a permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing program. So
yeah. Knowing if if they need anything up front, like, well, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. My thought process was gone. It's gone now. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, if no one has any questions.
Oh, it looks like Gabriel said, does the bedroom have to have, I found the chat box, door to open and close, or just the doorway? It does actually have to have an actual door that opens and closes. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kelly. We loved having you present to us. Kelly is a good friend of the AmeriCorps program. Well, the whole HST is, but yeah, thanks for your time, and we will see you all at 1 o'clock.
All right, cool. Talk to y'all later.